No one in that quiet town ever imagined that one hidden truth could shake every street, every doorway, and every whispered conversation that unfolded after sundown. It began with a story most people would have dismissed as rumor, just another tale carried by wind and gasoline through the open roads. Yet behind the murmurs lay a secret powerful enough to ignite loyalty, heartbreak, and fury all at once. And when it broke, it didn't spread gently. It detonated. By the time the truth surfaced, destiny had already taken its place behind the handlebars, ready to lead an army of riders into the night. For months, the whispers circled around a biker known for his quiet strength and unwavering loyalty, someone who never looked for trouble, but always stood firm when trouble found others. He had fallen in love, not recklessly, but deeply, with someone the town believed he should have never even looked at. The wife of a wealthy man whose influence reached far beyond his polished shoes and guarded smiles. Their connection had begun as a spark, unplanned and uninvited, but it grew into something neither of them could outrun. What they shared was not scandal. It was survival, the kind of bond that forms when two souls trapped in different cages finally recognize each other. Still, secrets as intense as theirs hold gravity, and gravity always pulls. Eventually, the truth clawed its way into daylight, tearing through the fragile veil they had tried to protect. When the wealthy man discovered the depth of their connection, the town braced for a storm, not of weather, but of power. No one expected kindness from a man who valued reputation more than humanity. And no one expected mercy when he began plotting the consequences for the biker who had captured the heart he believed he owned. But the biker was not alone. He never had been. The roads he rode were filled with brothers who carried their loyalty like armor and their fury like fire. When word spread of what had happened, of the threats, the humiliation, the danger closing in, messages shot through the biker community like lightning across steel skies. One rider told another, and then another, until the echo turned into a roar across counties, highways, and state lines. By nightfall, a decision had been made, even before anyone spoke aloud. As the clock struck midnight, the quiet town trembled under a sound it had never heard before, hundreds of engines rising together like thunder rolling over asphalt. 300 bikers rode in, not to start a war, but to reveal a truth of their own, that love, loyalty, and brotherhood can unite with a force wealth could never command. And what happened next would become a legend whispered for years. Proof that some stories don't just unfold. They erupt. The moment the truth spread across the town, the air shifted in ways people could feel but couldn't quite explain. Doors closed faster, conversations lowered, and every familiar street suddenly felt charged with tension. The wealthy man, furious and burning with wounded pride, began using every ounce of his influence to isolate the biker, calling in favors, twisting stories, and painting himself as the victim of a betrayal he believed unforgivable. For the biker, each day became heavier than the one before, as rumors sharpened like knives and eyes followed him with judgment he had never asked to face. But through it all, he held onto the memory of her, her voice, her courage, her quiet plea for a life she was never allowed to choose. She, too, felt the consequences closing in. Locked inside the elegant cage she once believed was safety, she watched her world crack open under the weight of the truth. The wealthy man monitored her every move, his anger simmering beneath forced calm, his questions slicing deeper each time she refused to deny her feelings. Alone in those vast, silent halls, she understood something she had ignored for far too long. Love had woken her heart, but truth had awakened her courage. And courage, once awakened, refuses to go back to sleep. Meanwhile, the biker tried to keep his life steady, though each hour carried the weight of consequences he hadn't chosen. He kept riding, each mile clearing his mind just enough to face another day. But something in him had changed. The love he carried wasn't reckless. It was purposeful, protective, and powerful. It made him stand taller, even as the world tried to push him down. And the more he faced the storm alone, the more he unknowingly drew the attention of those who were never far from him, his brothers on the road. As word reached the biker community, riders who had shared long roads with him began to understand the depth of what he was facing. They knew his strength, his loyalty, his character, and they knew the wealthy man's reputation for using money as a weapon. It didn't take long for the Brotherhood to start talking, exchanging fragments of the story, each piece igniting a collective fire they all felt rising. They understood that the biker had not betrayed anything. He had simply loved someone who needed to be seen, someone who had lived for too long behind polished walls and forced smiles. One evening, as the sun dipped beyond the horizon, the first group of riders appeared at his door. They didn't come with questions or judgment. They came with silence, with presence, with the unmistakable message that he wasn't alone. One rider placed a hand on his shoulder, firm, steady, unwavering. And in that single gesture, the biker felt something he hadn't felt since the truth erupted. The grounding strength of brotherhood, the kind of support no amount of money could command, and the promise that storms are easier to face when you're not standing in them alone. As the days passed, more riders arrived, some from nearby towns, others from miles away, each carrying a story of how the biker had once stood by them when no one else did. They gathered silently at first, but their presence spoke louder than any words. They filled his yard, lined the streets, and offered him the kind of loyalty only forged on long roads and shared scars. It wasn't a show of force. It was a circle of protection, a quiet declaration that they would not let him face the consequences of love alone. The wealthy man watched from a distance as his influence began slipping through his fingers. The more bikers gathered, the less control he felt over the narrative he had tried to twist. His anger grew, fed by fear of losing power, fear of losing the illusion of perfection he had built around his life, fear of being seen for who he truly was. But instead of reflecting inward, he doubled down, spreading darker lies and threatening consequences that only fueled the rider's determination even further. Meanwhile, whispers began to circulate through the town. People who knew the couple privately began to share glimpses of truth. How unhappy she had been, how long she had felt trapped, how she had found, in the biker, not temptation but safety. And as these quiet truths spread, perception began to shift. The biker was no longer seen as a villain. He was seen as someone who had been caught in the crossfire of a marriage built on control instead of love. And she, for the first time, began to be seen as a woman fighting for her freedom rather than a wife breaking vows. One evening, the biker received a message that stopped his breath. It was from her. She had managed to slip away from the wealthy man's watchful eyes long enough to reach out. Her words were trembling but determined. She told him she wasn't afraid anymore. She told him that love, real love, was worth facing whatever storm followed. And she told him something else, that she needed him, not as a savior, but as the one person who had ever truly seen her. The moment he finished reading her message, he knew everything was about to change. He stepped outside and looked at the growing line of riders gathered beneath the deepening night sky. Engines hummed softly, eyes lifted toward him with unwavering trust. The storm had arrived, and he was no longer just a man caught in it. He was someone ready to walk through it with the people who had chosen to ride beside him. And soon, they would ride into the night together, toward a truth the wealthy man could no longer contain. When night settled over the town, the biker stood outside his home, illuminated only by the faint glow of street lamps and the soft pulse of motorcycle headlights spread across the road. The air felt dense with anticipation, as if the darkness itself were holding its breath. Every rider sensed that something pivotal was close. They watched him closely, not as a leader, but as a brother standing on the edge of a moment that could redefine everything. And then he told them the truth. She was reaching out, afraid yet determined, and she needed help to reclaim her life. The silence that followed wasn't hesitation. It was unity being forged. Within minutes, plans began to form, quietly, efficiently, with the precision of men who had navigated hardship together. No one spoke of confrontation or violence. That was never their purpose. Their mission was simple: protect someone who had been trapped for far too long. The riders spread out, learning the layout of the wealthy man's estate, understanding the exits, the patterns, the risks. This wasn't rebellion. It was solidarity rooted in compassion, loyalty, and the understanding that sometimes standing up for someone else is the only way to remind them that they matter. As preparations unfolded, The biker wrestled with emotions that cut deeper than fear. He felt the weight of responsibility, the vulnerability of risking everything for the woman he loved, and the gratitude of knowing he wasn't facing it alone. Memories of their quiet moments together flooded him. Her laughter when she finally let herself breathe freely, the softness in her eyes when she spoke about dreams she had never dared to chase. These memories didn't weaken him. They steeled him. They reminded him why the storm ahead was worth facing. Meanwhile, she sat in the cold shadows of her mansion, listening to the heavy footsteps pacing the hallways outside her locked room. The wealthy man's anger had grown unpredictable, shifting from icy silence to sharp outbursts that made the walls feel smaller by the hour. She clung to the message she had sent earlier, praying he would come, praying she wasn't foolish to believe in a love that felt like freedom. Her heart pounded with fear, but deeper still was hope, the dangerous, powerful kind that refuses to die, even when everything seems lost. As the clock neared midnight, the riders mounted their motorcycles. Engines rumbled to life, one after another, sending tremors through the ground like a rising wave. The biker tightened his gloves, inhaled slowly, and nodded once. That was all it took. 300 riders prepared to move as one. Toward the mansion, toward the truth, toward a night that would be remembered for years. Not because of fury, but because of love strong enough to make men move like thunder. The ride into town began slowly, but every passing second intensified the atmosphere. Headlights cut through the darkness like sharp beams of resolve. Stores stood shuttered, curtains trembled, and distant dogs barked as the thunder of engines rolled through the streets. People peeked from windows, stunned by the sight of so many riders traveling with purpose rather than chaos. They weren't reckless. They weren't shouting. They were moving with the eerie calm of an army guided by conviction instead of rage. It was the kind of sight that carved itself permanently into memory. As they approached the wealthy man's estate, the night seemed to tighten around them. The mansion loomed ahead, grand, intimidating, its tall gates reflecting the glare of 300 headlights. For a moment, the biker felt his heartbeat slow, his senses sharpening. This wasn't about defiance. It wasn't about revenge. It was about rescuing someone whose voice had been silenced for far too long. He signaled the riders to hold their formation as he stepped toward the gate alone, the gravel crunching beneath each deliberate step. Inside, she heard the faint tremors of engines and rushed to the window, pressing her trembling hands against the glass. When she saw the sea of lights filling the road beyond the gates, her breath caught. For the first time in years, hope no longer felt fragile. It felt unstoppable. She recognized his silhouette instantly, standing strong, no longer a man hiding from consequences, but someone confronting them, unbroken and unafraid. Tears welled in her eyes, not from fear, but from the overwhelming realization that she had never truly been alone. The wealthy man stormed into the room moments later, his face twisting with disbelief and fury at the sight beyond the window. He shouted orders, stumbled through threats, and paced like a man losing control of the narrative he had spent years constructing. But his voice no longer held the power it once did. His dominance cracked under the weight of 300 riders waiting outside, not with weapons, but with unity. He realized too late that influence and money meant nothing in the presence of loyalty strong enough to bring an entire brotherhood to his doorstep. Outside, the biker placed his hand on the gate, feeling the metal vibrate with the rumble of engines behind him. He didn't shout or demand anything. He simply waited, knowing that she would choose her own path now. The riders remained still, their motorcycles idling like a heartbeat echoing through the night. And in that moment, a powerful truth settled over the entire town. This wasn't a confrontation, it was her liberation. And the decision about what happened next belonged to her, and her alone. Inside the mansion, her pulse hammered against her ribs as she faced the wealthy man. His words were sharp, slicing through the room with the venom of someone who suddenly realized he had lost control. He demanded explanations, insisted she had been manipulated, claimed the biker was nothing but a threat. But as he paced in circles, anger twisting his features, she felt a clarity rising inside her, steady, unwavering, born from every moment she had spent suffocating behind those polished walls. For the first time, she didn't flinch. She didn't bend. She simply met his fury with a calm he couldn't understand. Beyond the windows, the rumble of engines grew louder, echoing like a heartbeat of solidarity. 300 riders weren't there to intimidate. They were there to witness her reclaim her voice. She drew a deep breath, steadied herself, and spoke words she had never dared to speak before. She told him the truth he refused to hear, that she was done living a life designed by fear, done pretending perfection meant happiness, done calling captivity devotion. Her voice didn't shake. It resonated, soft but solid, the sound of a woman stepping out of the shadows of her own silence. The wealthy man froze, stunned by the firmness in her tone. He had grown so accustomed to control that he hadn't considered what it meant to lose it. His grip on her had been built on manipulation, not love, on appearances, not respect. Now, with truth cutting through his illusions, he found himself powerless. She didn't argue. She didn't defend. She simply walked past him, each step proof that she was no longer the woman he thought he owned. The finality in her stride left him standing speechless in the center of a room suddenly too large for him. As she approached the front door, her heart raced. But it wasn't fear anymore. It was liberation, raw and electrifying. She pushed the door open, and the cool night air rushed over her like a long-awaited breath. When she stepped onto the steps of the mansion and looked toward the road lined with motorcycles, her eyes found the biker immediately. He stood still among the riders, his expression a mix of hope, worry, and unspoken devotion. For a heartbeat, the entire world seemed to pause between them. Then she descended the stairs, slowly at first, then faster, as though each step pulled her closer to the life she had been denied for too long. When she reached the gate, the bikers parted instinctively, creating a clear path between them. And as she walked through, the tension broke like dawn breaking after a storm. She wasn't running away. She was choosing freedom, choosing truth, choosing love that didn't demand silence to survive. The moment she reached him, the world moved in two distinct directions. The life she left behind fading into silence, and the life she was stepping into rising with the thunder of engines ready to escort her anywhere she chose. The biker didn't touch her at first, not out of hesitation, but out of reverence. He searched her eyes, needing to know she wasn't acting out of fear or desperation. When she nodded, her gaze steady and filled with conviction, the relief in his expression was almost overwhelming. He opened his arms, and she stepped into them like someone returning home. Behind them, the riders erupted, not with cheers, but with the deep, unified revving of engines that shook the ground. It was their way of acknowledging her choice, their way of promising protection, their way of saying she was no longer walking into uncertainty alone. The sound rolled across the town like a declaration of freedom that even the wealthiest man couldn't silence. Light flickered from windows as people watched, realizing that the story wasn't one of scandal. It was one of liberation wrapped in courage and loyalty. The wealthy man stood at the doorway of his mansion, watching the scene unfold with a mixture of shock and helpless anger. For the first time, he saw that power built on control could collapse in an instant, and that love, real love, could inspire loyalty he could never buy. He shouted once, but his voice drowned beneath the roar of engines and the weight of his own defeat. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. Her future wasn't behind those walls anymore. The biker helped her onto his motorcycle, adjusting the seat and guiding her hands gently, making sure she felt safe. The moment she wrapped her arms around him, something inside both of them settled, something that had been restless, incomplete, longing. 300 riders closed in around them, engines humming like a protective heartbeat encircling the two souls at the center of all. They weren't just leaving the mansion. They were escorting her back to her life, one she could finally choose freely. When the convoy began to move, the night lit up with headlights stretching across the road like a river of determination and hope. She leaned against his back, her heart steady for the first time in years, her breath calm, her future unfolding beneath the wheels that carried her forward. And as 300 riders guided them into the darkness ahead, the town finally understood the truth. This wasn't the destruction of a story. It was the beginning of one born from courage, strengthened by loyalty, and carried by love powerful enough to move an entire brotherhood into the night. As the convoy disappeared into the open road, the echoes of 300 engines finally softened into the distance, leaving behind a town forever changed by what it had witnessed. People stepped out from behind curtains and doorways, realizing they had seen something rare, a moment when love refused to shrink beneath the weight of power, and when loyalty proved stronger than fear. In that silence, the truth settled across every street. The choices we make in the dark often become the stories that light the rest of our lives. And this one, born from courage and carried by roaring engines, will be told for years to come. Far down the road, beneath a sky washed in moonlight, the biker and the woman he loved rode together in a freedom neither of them had ever fully known. The night air wrapped around them like a promise, whispering that the past no longer held the authority to define who they were or who they could become. She leaned into him, trusting the steady heartbeat beneath her hands, while he guided the motorcycle with the confidence of a man who finally had something worth protecting with his whole soul. Their journey was no longer an escape. It was a beginning. The brotherhood followed behind them, their formation steady and unbreakable, each rider aware that this night symbolized far more than a rescue. It was a reminder that compassion can move mountains, that loyalty is built not with words but with action, and that standing up for someone in their most vulnerable moment can shift the course of an entire life. The roar of 300 motorcycles was not an act of rebellion. It was a testament to the power of choosing what is right, even when the world tries to convince you otherwise. As dawn began to color the horizon, the first beams of light revealed something profound. None of them knew exactly where the road would lead next, but all of them understood that freedom is crafted one brave decision at a time. The wealthy man's influence, once feared, now stood powerless against the unity forged among people who believed in something deeper than money: humanity, connection, and the courage to love without apology. What remained was a lesson strong enough to outlive the night itself. When you choose truth over fear, the road always opens. And if this story reached into you, if it stirred something, reminded you of your own quiet courage, or made you believe again in the strength of standing beside those who need you, then stay with us. Subscribe, like, and share your thoughts in the comments. Your voice helps keep stories like this alive, and together, we build a place where loyalty, love, and bravery continue to ride forward, one story at a time.